The sterile white envelope felt cold in Margaret Bloom's trembling hand. Outside, the Pacific Northwest winter howled, a hungry sound mirroring the ache in her joints. The choice was brutal. Her vital medication, or the final, crucial coats for the town's most vulnerable. One path offered comfort, the other dignity. She had to choose. In the salt-laced air of Port Blossom, a town tucked away on the Pacific Northwest coast, Margaret Bloom's world had shrunk. It was now contained within the four walls of her small cottage, serenaded by the cry of gulls and the low, mournful moan of a distant foghorn. At 78, Maggie, as she was once known, was a widow, a relic of a time when clothes were mended, not replaced. Her days were a quiet ritual of tea, toast, and the singular purpose that had come to consume her nights, fueled by the steady, rhythmic hum of her old Singer-sewing machine. It was a beast of cast iron and steel, a gift from her late husband, Arthur, on their 10th anniversary. "This'll outlast us both, Mags," he'd said, his fisherman's hand surprisingly gentle on the polished black enamel. He was half right. Now, under the solitary glow of a yellow-tinged desk lamp, the machine was her only companion in a secret, urgent mission. Her hands, gnarled and swollen with arthritis that bit deeper with every damp winter, moved with a practiced, aching grace. Each morning, it took a full 10 minutes of soaking them in warm water just to coax her fingers to unclench. Yet every evening, they transformed piles of donated remnants into bastions of warmth. She worked with a palette of ghosts, a floral chintz that once draped a sunny kitchen window, the sturdy denim of a farmer's worn-out jeans, a soft flannel shirt still faintly smelling of sawdust. These were not mere coats. They were statements of dignity, destined for the town's small homeless shelter. A sturdy wool blend for the body, a fleece lining for comfort, and on the collar of each, she stitched her small, defiant signature, a tiny, hand-embroidered winter wren. It was a bird that, despite its diminutive size, sang with a defiant, complex melody through the harshest of coastal storms, a secret message of hope she stitched for strangers she would never meet. The project was her race against the coming winter, and, more pressingly, against the escalating rebellion in her own joints. Each finished coat, hung carefully on a freestanding rack, was a triumph. But each also represented hours of stoicism, of ignoring the sharp, protesting jab when she guided thick wool under the needle. She was pouring her remaining strength into these threads, unaware that her own lifeline was about to be frayed to the breaking point. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a grocery flyer and a postcard from a niece in Arizona. Its sterile white envelope, bearing the crisp, impersonal logo of her supplemental insurance provider, felt cold to the touch. Maggie set it aside, telling herself she'd open it after her tea, but it sat on the edge of her kitchen table, a silent, rectangular accusation. Finally, her curiosity gave way to a familiar sense of dread. Her fingers, stiff from the morning chill, fumbled with the seal. The paper inside was thin, the text dense and bureaucratic. Words like policy adjustment, revised formulary, and patient responsibility swam before her eyes. It took her a moment to find the number that mattered, the one circled in red ink by a helpful, or perhaps cruel, pharmacy clerk. Her quarterly copayment for the medication that kept her arthritis from seizing her hands into useless claws had been adjusted. The new amount was $480. The breath left her body in a quiet, ragged puff. $480. To the people who wrote these letters, it was a line item. To Maggie, it was an impassable mountain. It was her entire discretionary budget for the next 3 months. It was the grocery money she stretched thin, the emergency fund that didn't exist. More than that, it was the exact sum she had carefully saved, dollar by dollar, in an old biscuit tin. The money was earmarked for a bolt of high-quality, waterproof waxed canvas she'd seen at the fabric store, the perfect, final material for the last 3 coats on the rack, the ones meant for the harshest nights of the coming January. The choice presented itself with brutal clarity: the medicine which would allow her to continue her work, or the work itself. Her hands throbbed in a painful premonition, a reminder of the cost of defiance. For a fleeting moment, she considered compromise, cheaper fabric, a plastic poncho lining. The thought soured in her mouth. She was not just making coats, she was bestowing dignity. A leaky coat was a betrayal. That night, sleep offered no escape. She lay in bed, listening to the wind howl off the ocean, rattling the window frames. It was a hungry sound, the very sound she was fighting against. She pictured a faceless man huddled in a doorway, the wind slicing through thin, inadequate layers. Then she pictured her own hands, twisted and useless, the singer silent in the corner. The two images warred in her mind. By dawn, the battle was over. With slow, deliberate movements, she rose, walked to the kitchen and took the pharmacy notice. She folded it into a neat square, lifted the lid of the old biscuit tin, and slipped the letter underneath the small roll of bills. She chose the coats. The pain would be her own secret to bear. Layla Ortiz knew the rhythms of Port Blossom by heart. As a mail carrier for the USPS, her life was a metronome set to the town's quiet pulse. The morning rush of letters out, the afternoon trickle of packages in. She knew who was expecting a college acceptance letter, who had a weakness for online seed catalogs, and who still received handwritten correspondence from a sibling across the country. Margaret Bloom on Sparrow Street was one of her favorites. A polite nod, a quiet smile, and occasionally a shortbread cookie left in the mailbox on a cold day. For the past month, however, Layla had noticed a change in the rhythm of the little cottage. Maggie's light, specifically the one in her front living room, was on long after the rest of the street had succumbed to darkness. It was a steadfast, golden square against the deep blue of the evening, often burning past 10, sometimes even 11. Layla, a young woman who valued her 8 hours of sleep, found it both curious and concerning. The answer came during a ferocious November squall. The sky had been the color of a bruise all afternoon, and by 4 o'clock, a driving, icy rain was lashing the coast. Layla was on her last delivery, a small, registered package that required a signature. It was for Maggie. Hunching her shoulders against the wind, she hurried up the slick stone path to the cottage's covered porch. As she raised her hand to knock, a movement inside caught her eye. Through the window, past the condensation blurring the edges of the glass, she saw a scene that made her freeze. It was like peering into a secret, sacred world. There was Maggie, bathed in the warm pool of her desk lamp, leaning intently over her sewing machine. Her back was curved with concentration, her silver hair pinned up in a loose bun. Beside her, on a freestanding rack, hung a row of the most beautiful, sturdy-looking winter coats Layla had ever seen. They were made of rich wools and tweeds, in warm earth tones, each one clearly a work of immense skill and care. Layla's gaze shifted back to Maggie. She saw the older woman pause, lift a hand to her mouth to stifle a yawn, and then flex her fingers, a small, almost imperceptible wince of pain crossing her features before she placed her hands back on the fabric. And in that instant, another memory surfaced in Layla's mind with sudden, gut-wrenching clarity. The sterile white envelope with the insurance company's logo she had delivered to this very house last week. The pieces clicked together. The late nights, the pained hands, the row of winter coats perfectly sized for adults hanging like a silent, selfless army. Layla didn't need to see the contents of the letter to understand. A wave of something overwhelming, part awe, part heartbreak, and part of fierce, protective anger, washed over her. She stood motionless on the porch, the rain forgotten, the package in her hand feeling impossibly heavy. Margaret Bloom wasn't just sewing, she was sacrificing, and no one else knew. That night, Layla couldn't sleep. The image of Maggie at her sewing machine was seared into her mind, a quiet testament to a kind of goodness Layla hadn't known existed outside of old movies. She tossed and turned, the wind and rain outside a pale imitation of the storm in her heart. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that golden window, a tiny beacon of selfless industry against the vast, indifferent darkness. Her first instinct was to act directly. She could withdraw a few $100s from her own savings, slip it into an envelope, and leave it anonymously in Maggie's mailbox. But the thought felt hollow, insufficient. It would solve the immediate problem, but it would miss the point entirely. It would be a transaction, a secret kept between two people, when what Maggie was doing felt like something that deserved to be sung from the rooftops. Furthermore, Layla knew the quiet, fierce pride of the older generation. Maggie wasn't asking for help. A direct offer of cash, however well-intentioned, could feel like pity, a mark of shame on her stubborn independence. No, the solution had to be as gentle and unassuming as Maggie herself. It had to be about celebrating the work, not lamenting the struggle. It had to come from the community, not as a handout but as a collective embrace. The help had to feel like a thank you, not a rescue. The next morning, fueled by a sleepless night's resolve and 2 cups of strong coffee, Layla sat at her small kitchen table and opened her laptop. She navigated to the Port Blossom Community Forum, a bustling Facebook group that served as the town's virtual town square. It was a chaotic but vital hub for lost dogs, bake sale announcements, and heated debates about summer parking. Layla took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, and began to type. She titled the post, "The Sewing Angel of Sparrow Street." With careful, respectful words, she painted the picture she had witnessed. She described the golden light in the window on a stormy night, the focused silhouette of a woman at her machine. She wrote about the row of beautiful, handmade coats, not just functional, but full of heart, and the tiny, perfect wrens she had glimpsed embroidered on the collars. She didn't use Maggie's name, though the little cottage with the blue door on Sparrow Street was a clue most locals would immediately understand. Then she took a calculated risk, framing it with the utmost care. "I also delivered an official-looking letter from an insurance company the other day," she wrote, "and I saw the way she paused her work to flex her hands, the way we do when something aches. I can't know for sure, but my heart tells me a difficult choice is being made in that quiet room, a choice between her own comfort and the comfort of strangers." She concluded her post not with a plea, but with a simple, powerful reflection. "I think a real-life angel lives among us," she wrote. "She's not asking for anything, but she is giving everything. She is quietly stitching warmth and dignity for our most vulnerable neighbors. When we are all tucked into our warm beds, she is working. Maybe we can be the warmth that comes back to her." She deliberately avoided setting up a GoFundMe or asking for direct donations. She just told the story. She trusted the heart of her town. Then, with a click, she sent her message out into the digital ether and hoped. The response was not a trickle, it was a flood. Within an hour, Layla's post had over 100 reactions, hearts, care emojis, and a handful of tearful faces. The comments section exploded, transforming from a simple thread into a town-wide outpouring of recognition and affection. A woman named Sarah Henderson was the first to connect the final dot. "That has to be Mrs. Bloom. She altered my daughter's communion dress 10 years ago and refused to take more than $5. She said seeing a child happy was payment enough." Another comment followed from a gruff-looking fisherman named Al. "My dad's old wool peacoat went to the donation bin last month. I bet she's the one who turned it into something new. God bless her." Then the offers began. They were small at first. "I have a box of quilting scraps she can have. I can drop off a thermos of hot soup." But the momentum was building, coalescing into something powerful. The owner of the local hardware store, a man known more for his grumpiness than his generosity, chimed in. "I'll get her a proper daylight lamp for that sewing room. No one should work in the dark." It was the owner of the Daily Grind coffee shop who took the next step. He created a simple online collection jar through a local payment app, linking it in the comments. "Let's take care of that pharmacy bill for our angel," he wrote. "I'll start with $50. The initial goal of $480 was met in less than 2 hours. By nightfall, the total had soared past $1,000, then $1,500. People weren't just donating. They were sharing their own stories of Maggie's quiet kindnesses over the years, weaving a collective tapestry of her impact on Port Blossom. 2 days later, Layla stood on Maggie's porch again, but this time she wasn't alone. With her were Sarah Henderson and the coffee shop owner, holding a large manila envelope. Inside was a card, and printed on the card was the final donation amount, along with pages and pages of the heartfelt comments from the forum. Layla knocked softly. The door opened, and Maggie stood there, looking smaller and more tired than Layla remembered. Her eyes widened in confusion at the small delegation on her doorstep. "Miss Ortiz," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Hi, Maggie," Layla said, her own voice thick with emotion. She held out the envelope. "This is for you. It's from the town. It's a thank you." Maggie took the envelope, her arthritic fingers fumbling to open it. She pulled out the card first, her eyes scanning the astonishing number. A gasp escaped her lips. Then she began to read the printed comments, her gaze darting from one to the next. Her face, a mask of disbelief just moments before, began to crumble. Her shoulders started to shake, and a single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek, followed by another. She looked up, her eyes swimming at the three faces before her. I don't understand," she whispered, clutching the pages to her chest as if they were a lifeline. I just, I just did a little sewing." Layla reached out and gently took Maggie's free hand, her own fingers warm against the older woman's cool, fragile skin. "Maggie," she said, her voice soft but clear, "you did more than that. You were stitching this whole community together. You were stitching its heart." The weeks that followed were a quiet revolution for Margaret Bloom. The first thing she did was walk to the pharmacy, her posture straighter than it had been in years, and pay for a full year's supply of her medication. The relief was not just physical. It was a profound unburdening of a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. Her hands, soothed by the medicine, began to feel like her own again. But the true change came from the community's embrace. The donations of fabric were overwhelming. Bolts of soft merino wool, waterproof canvas, and vibrant fleece arrived on her doorstep. With the surplus funds, and at the gentle urging of Layla, an idea began to form. It was no longer just about her secret project. The Port Blossom Community Center offered her a large, well-lit room twice a week. And so, the Stitches of Hope workshop was born. It was a free sewing class for anyone who wanted to learn. Her first students were a group of teenagers, kids who had grown up with fast fashion and had never held a needle. With patience and a newfound joy, Maggie taught them. She showed them how to thread a machine, how to read a pattern, how to mend a tear instead of throwing something away. She was no longer a lonely widow in a quiet cottage. She was a beloved mentor, her laughter echoing in the spacious room, a sound more healing than any medicine. One cold evening, as winter finally settled over the coast, Layla finished her route and drove past the community center. She slowed her mail truck to a crawl. Inside, the room was ablaze with light and filled with people. Through the large window, she saw Maggie, standing in the center of a circle of young, eager faces, her own face animated with a joy so profound it seemed to radiate. The single, lonely lamp from her living room had been replaced by a constellation of lights, and its warmth was now shared by an entire community.